Let's start with something simple, something that should not be controversial. Children were raped, systematically, deliberately, for decades. That is what the Epstein files confirm. Not suggest, not imply, confirm. And the question that every single one of us should be asking, the only question that matters is, how did this happen for so long? Who knew, and who made sure it kept happening? Because those answers are in those files, buried, redacted, deleted from the government's own website, but there. Pause. Let that land. I want to take you through everything that has come out over the last several months. The law that forced this disclosure, what the documents actually contain, who is named, what the Justice Department tried to hide, what is happening internationally as a result, and what is conspicuously not happening here at home. By the end of this, you will understand why 2/3 of Americans in a January 2026 CNN poll believe the government is deliberately withholding information, because it is. And the person sitting in the Oval Office, the person who promised to release everything, is at the center of why. Let's go back to November 2025. Two members of Congress, Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, and Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, pushed through a piece of legislation called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It passed the House. The Senate approved it unanimously. Donald Trump signed it into law on November 19, 2025. The law was explicit and it was extraordinary. It said, "No record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary." It required a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons named in the materials. It demanded full disclosure. Trump signed it. He had been promising, since his 2024 campaign, that he would release the Epstein files. In a June 2024 interview with Fox News, he said he would. In a September 2024 interview with Lex Fridman, he said he would have no problem releasing additional files and would probably make the client list public. The crowds loved it. The promise was simple, and it was popular, because the American public understood intuitively that something had been covered up for a very long time. The deadline under the law was December 19, 2025. The Department of Justice missed it. What they released on that date was widely condemned by members of both parties as woefully incomplete. At least 550 pages were fully redacted. A 119-page document labeled Grand Jury New York was completely blacked out. 3 consecutive documents totaling 255 pages entirely blacked out. And within hours, at least 16 files disappeared entirely from the DOJ's own website, including a photograph showing Donald Trump. Slower here. They put it up. Then they took it down. A photograph showing the President of the United States, connected to the most significant child sex trafficking case in American history, appeared on the government's own disclosure website and was then quietly deleted. The full release of 3.5 million pages, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images finally came on January 30, 2026, over a month late. And even then, Khanna and Massie went to the Justice Department, reviewed an unredacted version, and found 6 men whose names had been wrongly removed. 6 names, scrubbed. The 2 lawmakers who wrote the law accused the DOJ of actively covering up the identities of individuals who should, by law, have been named publicly. Let's talk about what is actually in those files, because the scale of it is almost impossible to process, and I want to make sure we do not let the sheer volume of documents obscure the human reality of what they describe. Grand jury transcripts include the testimony of FBI agents who described their interviews with girls and young women. The youngest person interviewed was 14 years old. One woman, who was 21 at the time she gave her testimony, told the grand jury that Epstein had hired her when she was 16 years old to perform sexual massages. She then went on to recruit other girls, mostly people she knew from high school. For every girl she brought to him, Epstein paid her $200. She told girls who were underage to lie about their age and say they were 18. Take a breath. An employee at Epstein's Florida estate told the FBI in 2007, almost 20 years ago, that his duties included fanning $100 bills on a table near Epstein's bed, placing a gun between the mattresses in Epstein's bedroom, and cleaning up after Epstein's frequent massages with young girls. Cleaning up, including disposing of used condoms. The FBI opened its investigation in July 2006. Agents expected an indictment by May 2007. A prosecutor wrote up a proposed indictment after multiple underage girls told police exactly what had happened to them. The draft indictment targeted not just Epstein but 3 of his personal assistants. Then Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney in Miami at the time, signed off on a deal that allowed Epstein to avoid federal prosecution entirely. Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge of soliciting prostitution from someone under 18 and received an 18-month sentence, much of which he served on work release, leaving jail to go to his office during the day. Acosta later became Donald Trump's first Secretary of Labor. That is not speculation. That is documented. That is in the files. The question of how Alexander Acosta made that deal happen, and on whose behalf he made it, has never been fully answered. The files gesture toward an answer. The names of 6 men that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie found redacted in violation of the law. We still do not know who those men are. Now let's talk about Donald Trump. And I want to be precise here, because precision matters. Donald Trump has not been charged with any crime in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. That is a fact. The files contain thousands of references to Trump, many of them news clippings, many of them people emailing each other articles about Trump's politics or gossiping about his family. A mention in an email is not evidence of a crime. I want to be clear about that, but there are specific items in these files that go considerably beyond a mention in a news clipping, and they deserve to be discussed seriously, not as gotcha fodder, but because we are talking about documents released by the United States Department of Justice as part of the most consequential disclosure of evidence regarding the systematic sexual abuse of children that this country has ever produced. A court document describes a 14-year-old girl who was taken to Mar-a-Lago in 1994. She said she was there with Jeffrey Epstein, who introduced her to Donald Trump. According to the document, Epstein elbowed Trump playfully and said, referring to the girl, "This is a good one, right?" Trump smiled and nodded in agreement. They both chuckled. The girl felt uncomfortable but was, at 14, too young to fully understand why. Do not editorialize here. Just let the document speak. An internal DOJ email, sent in January of 2020 from a U.S. attorney to a recipient whose name is redacted, states regarding flight records the office had just received that Donald Trump had traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than they had previously reported or been aware of. That email was sent internally by prosecutors during an active investigation. It was not written by a political opponent. It was not written by a journalist. It was written by a federal prosecutor flagging information they considered significant enough to document. Investigators examining Steve Bannon's iPhone in June 2021 using forensic software found a photo of Trump with Ghislaine Maxwell on the device. Bannon, who had been facing federal fraud charges before Trump pardoned him in 2021, had a photo of the current president with the woman convicted of trafficking children for Jeffrey Epstein. There was also a rape allegation in one FBI file referencing Trump. It was apparently made during the 2020 campaign. It appears in the files without resolution. I am not here to adjudicate that allegation. I am here to tell you it exists, that it is in documents released by the Justice Department, and that the sitting president has not been asked to address it in any serious, formal way. Now here is where the story gets even darker, not just in terms of what Epstein did, but in terms of what these files reveal about how power operates. Because Jeffrey Epstein was not simply a wealthy criminal who happened to know important people, the files suggest, and I use that word advisedly, because the full picture remains obscured by redactions, they suggest that Epstein cultivated relationships with the powerful as a deliberate strategy. Emails show that Epstein enlisted Thorbjørn Jagland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, to try to help him gain access to Russian leaders, including Vladimir Putin. Epstein was attempting to use a former head of government as a conduit to the Russian president. We do not know what he wanted from Putin, We do not know what he offered Jagland in return. We know that Norwegian police have now charged Jagland with gross corruption and that he could face up to 10 years in prison. We know that Epstein's will left $10 million to the children of Mona Jewel, Norway's ambassador to Jordan. $10 million to the children of a serving diplomat. Jewel has since resigned. We know that Thomas Barrack, Trump's longtime friend, the man who led Trump's inaugural committee, who was a frequent presence in the White House, and who now serves as U.S. ambassador to Turkey and special envoy to Syria, maintained regular, close contact with Epstein for years after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor. CBS News analyzed more than 100 text and email exchanges. Their correspondence continued even as Barrack was raising money for Trump's 2016 campaign. At times, according to the documents, Epstein appeared to regard Barrack as a potential conduit for passing information to Trump himself. We know that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick visited Epstein's private island in 2012, 4 years after Epstein's conviction with his wife, his children, and his nannies. He confirmed this under oath before a Senate committee. When Trump was asked about it, he said he was not aware and had not spoken to Lutnick about it. Pause. Let the pattern register. The inaugural committee chairman, the current ambassador to Turkey, the current Commerce Secretary, all maintaining social or professional contact with a convicted child sex offender years after his conviction, all currently serving in the Trump administration. None of them are facing any consequences. Let's talk about what is happening in the rest of the world, because the contrast with what is happening in the United States is stark, and it is telling. In the United Kingdom, former Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, after being stripped of his royal titles, is under investigation by British police. The files revealed he may have shared confidential trade information with Epstein in 2010. King Charles has said he is ready to support investigators. Prince William and Princess Catherine issued a public statement saying they are deeply concerned by the new revelations and focused on the victims. Even the royal family is being held to account. Peter Mandelson, one of the most prominent figures in the British Labour Party and formerly Britain's ambassador to the United States, was stripped of his ambassadorship and resigned from the House of Lords because of his ties to Epstein. Not because he was convicted of a crime, because appearing friendly with a convicted sex trafficker of children is considered disqualifying in the United Kingdom. In Norway, a former prime minister has been criminally charged. The country's ambassador to Jordan has resigned. Turkish prosecutors are actively investigating based on evidence in the files that Epstein trafficked Turkish children. A panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a formal statement saying that the Epstein files depict a global criminal enterprise and that the alleged acts sexual slavery, trafficking, torture, enforced disappearance may meet the legal threshold of crimes against humanity under international law. Crimes against humanity. That phrase has a specific legal meaning. The UN does not use it casually. And in the United States, the people whose names appear in these files, who served in or currently serve in the Trump administration, have largely kept their jobs. Howard Lutnick is still Commerce Secretary. Thomas Barrack is still ambassador to Turkey. The 6 men whose names were illegally redacted from the public release remain unnamed. The DOJ has declared its January 30th release to be the final one. Nothing is happening. I want to talk about the DOJ's memo, because this is important context and because I think it has been used in a misleading way. In July 2025, Axios reported that the Justice Department and FBI concluded in a 2-page memo that no evidence existed that Epstein kept a client list, that he blackmailed prominent individuals, or that he was murdered. The memo affirmed the medical examiner's finding of suicide. Kash Patel went on Joe Rogan and said, "He killed himself. Do you really think I wouldn't give that to you if it existed?" Now, I want to take that seriously. It is possible that Epstein died by suicide. It is possible, I will even say likely, that the most lurid conspiracy theories about a secret client list used for blackmail are not accurate. I am not asking you to believe that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered in a dramatic deep state operation. What I am asking you to notice is this. The same administration that told us definitively that there was no client list, no murder. Nothing to see here is the administration that then released 3.5 million pages of documents, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images, and tried to redact as much of it as possible, deleted files from their own website, and whose DOJ is accused by the very lawmakers who wrote the disclosure law of illegally hiding names. You can believe Epstein killed himself and still believe that what these files contain is explosive. You can believe there was no formal blackmail list and still believe that Epstein cultivated relationships with powerful men in ways that gave him extraordinary protection for an extraordinarily long time. The no blackmail list memo does not explain why federal prosecutors in 2007 had a draft indictment and then made it disappear. It does not explain why Alexander Acosta made the deal he made. It does not explain why the 6 wrongly redacted names are still hidden. This is a key pivot. Slow down, be deliberate. What the files confirm is not in dispute. What is documented across millions of pages and thousands of interviews is something simpler and more damning than any conspiracy theory. Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused children for decades. He had access to some of the most powerful people in the world. He used that access to insulate himself from accountability. When accountability finally came, it came in a weakened, negotiated, almost meaningless form. And when the law finally forced disclosure of what the government knew, that government, this government, right now, today tried to hide as much of it as it legally could. Let me bring it back to a number. 35. That is the number of girls the FBI identified in Florida alone, with similar stories of girls who told police they had been brought to Epstein's estate and paid for sexual contact. 35 girls, all with similar accounts, all identified by the FBI. And Epstein walked away with an 18-month sentence and work release. The youngest interviewee in the grand jury transcripts released under the Transparency Act was 14 years old. 14. The same age as the girl who was brought to Mar-a-Lago, who watched the man who would become president of the United States nod and smile when Epstein asked if she was a good one. I am a Democrat. I will not pretend otherwise. I think Donald Trump is unfit for office for reasons that go well beyond Jeffrey Epstein. But I want to be careful here, because the Epstein case has a habit of becoming partisan in ways that actually serve the people who should be held accountable. Bill Clinton is in those files. His name appears repeatedly. He has refused to testify before the House Oversight Committee. His connection to Epstein and his repeated trips on Epstein's plane deserve exactly the same scrutiny. I am not interested in protecting anyone. I am interested in accountability. And I think that is actually the correct Democratic position. Not to use this as a weapon against one party, but to demand that the law that was written and passed and signed, be followed. That law says no record shall be withheld on the basis of political sensitivity. It says notable individuals and politicians shall not be redacted. And yet 6 names are still hidden. And yet 16 files were briefly deleted. And yet the Attorney General received the case files and declared the disclosure complete before anyone could verify whether it actually was. I want to spend a moment on Ghislaine Maxwell, because she was there too. She was deposed by the House Oversight Committee by video in February 2026. Republicans and Democrats sat across from her and asked, who were the other co-conspirators? Which men abused girls? She invoked the Fifth Amendment. On every question, she sat in prison, currently serving a 20-year sentence, and she said nothing. Maxwell knows names. The FBI's 2019 internal emails reference 10 co-conspirators they were actively discussing. 10. Maxwell was one of them. She has been convicted. The other 9, or however many there are, have not been charged with anything. Some of their names may be among the 6 wrongly redacted by the DOJ. We do not know. That is the point. We do not know because the people responsible for telling us have chosen not to. There is a file in the release, an email that mentions an Austrian passport found in Epstein's Manhattan mansion after his 2019 arrest. The passport has Epstein's photograph on it but lists his name as Marius Robert Fortelny, with Saudi Arabia listed as his residence. Federal prosecutors revealed this passport existed in court in 2019. The Epstein files now include images of it. Why did Jeffrey Epstein have a fake passport with a fake name listing a Saudi Arabian address? What was he using it for? Who helped him obtain it? The files do not fully answer these questions. They raise them. Let me talk about what accountability looks like and what it does not look like. Accountability does not look like a CNN poll showing that 49% of Americans are dissatisfied with the government's disclosures. Accountability does not look like a Reuters poll showing that only 23% of Americans approve of Trump's handling of the case. Accountability does not look like the UN issuing a statement that the conduct documented may constitute crimes against humanity. All of that is important. None of it is accountability. Accountability looks like the 6 hidden names being made public, as the law requires. It looks like a special counsel or independent prosecutor, someone not appointed by an administration with documented connections to Epstein's network, being given access to the unredacted files and the authority to pursue charges. It looks like Alexander Acosta being asked, under oath, in a formal setting, what happened in 2007. It looks like the DOJ's claim that January 30th was the final release being challenged and litigated, given that the DOJ's own estimate suggests 2.5 million additional pages may exist that have not been made public. It looks like Congress continuing to push, continuing to subpoena, continuing to hold hearings that are about the victims and not about political points. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, a Democrat and a Republican, showed that this is possible. They wrote the law together. They went to the DOJ together. They found the violations together. That is what oversight looks like. That is what the American public is waiting for more of. Build here. This is the emotional core of the argument. Because here is the thing about the 35 girls in Florida, the 14-year-old at Mar-a-Lago, the 16-year-old who was recruited and then became a recruiter herself. They did not have powerful friends. They did not have lawyers who could negotiate plea deals. They did not have friends who could delete documents from government websites. They had the truth. And for a very long time, the truth was not enough. For years, the truth sat in FBI files, in grand jury testimony, in prosecutors' notes, and nothing happened. And now the law has forced those files into the open, and there is a choice being made in real time about whether the truth will finally be enough. Right now, the answer from the Trump administration is no. The answer from the 6 unnamed men is no. The answer from Ghislaine Maxwell, invoking the 5th on every question, is no. And the answer from the poll showing that 2/3 of Americans believe the government is withholding information is the public knows it. 3.5 million pages, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. That is what the law dragged into the open. It is more than any single person or newsroom can fully process, and that is not an accident. Volume is itself a form of concealment. Bury it in data and hope that no one has the patience to find the thing you do not want found. But some things are already found. They are documented. They are on the record. A fake passport, a draft federal indictment that disappeared, a plea deal that let a convicted abuser of children go to his office every day while his victims were left without justice, a memo that said there was no client list, issued by an administration whose ambassador to Turkey was exchanging more than 100 messages with that same man after his conviction. 6 names hidden in violation of the law that the same administration signed. A photo of the president, briefly visible, then deleted. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented record. And the documented record demands one thing above all else, that the people who are supposed to enforce the law actually enforce it, regardless of whose name is in the files. The victims were children. They deserve more than a 3.5 million page document dump that is then declared closed. They deserve accountability. And right now, the people in power in the United States of America are betting that you will not demand it. Hold, end there.